Germanicus was wary of this danger and marched his unified army back to the Ems River, where they had previously destroyed the Bructeri. Here, he felt a little bit more comfortable and split the army. Germanicus would embark his men on the ships that had been used in the initial assault and return home via the northern route. Alongside them would ride his cavalry for mutual support. Stertinius would linger briefly to receive the surrender of some Germanic tribes, while Caecina moved swiftly south with 4 legions and the bulk of the remaining troops. This army group would return by way of the Long Bridges. As the name implies, it was a series of narrow causeways and bridges which cut through an area of particularly marshy terrain. Such a route was an obvious strategic risk, but at the same time provided the quickest way home. Thus, Caecina decided to mitigate the window of attack by marching his men forwards with all haste. However, they could ultimately only advance as fast as the baggage animals. Arminius, meanwhile, had been keeping an eye on the splintering Roman forces and decided that now was his chance to strike. He rallied the tribes in pursuit of Caecina, shadowing the force and delaying their advance. At the same time, advance units were sent ahead to outpace both armies and take up positions along the wooded hills flanking the entrance to the Long Bridges. When the Romans finally reached the valley and saw the raised causeway stretching into the distance, they must have sighed with relief. However, their hopes would soon be dashed when scouts reported that the Long Bridges were in a poor state of disrepair. Apparently, entire sections of the decades-old infrastructure project had collapsed, washed away, or even been sabotaged. In light of this news, Caecina was left with a difficult choice. He could pack his bags and attempt to go the long way around. However, doing so would mean marching into the jaws of the ever-swelling ranks of their Germanic host behind him and whatever devious ambushes Arminius had concocted along the avenues of escape. Alternatively, Caecina could stick with the devil of a situation he knew here and commit to the crossing. After all, the Romans were master engineers who were more than capable of making the necessary repairs to reach safety. All they needed was time. The seasoned commander thus built a camp and split his forces in 2, one to carry out construction and a second to establish a perimeter of defense. This would be a life or death last stand. Looking on, Arminius must have been pleased by the sight of the 4 legions trapped against the marshes. Their eagle standards would make fine additions to his collection. Ever since they had taken the offensive, the legions had dealt a punishing string of blows to the Germanic tribes. Entire villages and towns had been wiped out, with pillaging, burning, and mass slaughter, creating a wasteland beyond the Rhine. The campaigns at the end of 15 AD in particular had seen a massive assault by the legions which had pushed Arminius deep into the forests of the east. However, with winter approaching, the Romans had finally been forced to relent and were now receding like a tide back to their bases on the frontier. This critical moment opened a window of opportunity for Arminius. At the Long Bridges, he had managed to trap 4 legions upon their retreat against the marshes and once again made ready to repeat his master stroke of Teutoburg Forest. The tribes had suffered long enough at the hands of the invader. Here, they would make the Romans pay. Here, they would renew the hope of victory. Caecina had made the decision to commit to the crossing at the Long Bridges rather than try to force his way around. This meant dividing his forces in 2, one for repairs and one for defense. They began immediately. Screening forces fanned out to secure the perimeter, while lignatories collected building materials, cohorts dug trenches, and engineering squads planned construction works. The Germanic tribes, meanwhile, occupied the high ground above and were similarly active. They set up their own positions in the hills, sent out raiding parties to harass the enemy, and began their own counter-engineering works to divert nearby streams towards the Romans to further flood their positions. That first day was an incredible sight of frenzied activity. Like a pair of disturbed anthills, the opposing armies swarmed over the area to complete their missions while thwarting that of the enemy. In these contests, the Romans had the advantage of experience and technical expertise. However, the tribes had the advantage of the terrain, their knowledge of the area, and their vast numbers. The legionary work crews were forced to trudge through wet and muddy conditions under a near-constant barrage of slingstones and light javelins. What few Roman fortifications managed to go up became magnets for such attacks, which whittled away the defenders with incessant harassment. The legionaries which attempted to strike back were said to be heavily encumbered by the mud, barely able to advance or throw their pila. Thankfully, the fearless generalship of Caecina managed to see them through to nightfall. They were alive, but had little to show for it. Much of their progress had been undone by the attacks or the unexpected flooding that had been unleashed by the barbarians. Food supplies were dropping, the wounded or dying were piling up, and morale was on the verge of collapse. Meanwhile, on the dry ground above, they could see the warm fires of the barbarian tribes and hear the raucous laughter of an enemy in high spirits. Tomorrow's prospects were grim. Kaikina knew that inaction and complacency would breed despair in the situation. They needed some ray of hope to cling to fight for. He therefore called a meeting of the senior leadership and consulted with the engineers on what could be done. They decided that it would be possible to begin marching across the partially completed bridge works. While this would not get them back home, it would at least represent some forward progress and should greatly reduce the enemy's ability to strike at them. The orders were passed down through the chain of command, yet even he was not assured of its success. Tacitus writes that night, Kaikina was haunted by a nightmare where he had seen General Varus rising out of the swamps, covered in blood, extending his hand and beckoning to him. Such an ill omen was not to be shared with the men, lest they lose all hope. He must trust in the plan. At dawn, the legions marched out. They assembled into a massive square formation with the baggage train at its center and a legion on each side. The advance across the long bridges was painfully slow. The heavier baggage carts and cavalry forces carefully moved across the groaning causeway, while the lighter infantry and auxiliaries waded through the marshes on the flanks. Arminius and the tribes watched like some famished bird of prey. Patient, they merely sent forth harassing units to delay the rear guard, while keeping the bulk of their troops at the ready. The Romans were maintaining a tight perimeter, and their discipline was holding out. But this would not last forever. As the legions moved forward into the marshes, their supply train, aptly called the impedimenta, became bogged down. Seeing this, the square was forced to slow and come to a halt. As the sun rose higher in the sky and the hours of the day ticked by, it seems that the soldiers had enough of merely watching their military slaves struggling to keep the mules and wagons moving. They therefore began to abandon their positions as guards to help things move along. The tidy order of the defensive square broke apart. It was this exact moment of weakness that Arminius had been waiting for. He now ordered the assault. Mass waves of tribal forces ran screaming down the hills and crashed upon the disoriented Roman rear. The attack proved devastating. Arminius himself led a pick force of men that cut through the legions and their animals, heading for the soft innards of the baggage train, which held the supplies, the wounded, the officer corps, and the eagles. As he advanced, the chieftain is reported to have called out that this was Varus and his legions, trapped once again in their ancient doom. Indeed, the situation was quickly spiraling into a disaster. The Roman force was holding together by a mere thread. Most of its units abandoned the long bridges, fighting their way back towards the more defensible dry land from which they had come. The integrity of the defensive square was thus entirely gone, leaving Caecina dangerously exposed. Germanic forces closed in, cutting the horse out from under the Roman commander and almost killing him. Luckily, the units from the vanguard came to his rescue and helped escort the remaining forces back to terra firma. They did so at great cost, as the wounded or isolated elements of their forces had to be abandoned. In their wake, the Germanic troops swarmed in to engulf what was left behind. They took prisoners, killed stragglers, and raided the abandoned tools, tents, supplies, and valuables that clogged the sunken battlefield. Perhaps the only silver lining to be had was that this led the barbarians to lose their own cohesion, which allowed the Romans the time they needed to regroup. The surviving legions had escaped the defeat with the eagles and not much else. They had no food, no shelter, and few tools for making camp. Thus, as the sun began to set, they were left to build a most pitiful camp. Its walls were made of makeshift sod, topped by an assortment of scavenged materials, while its insides were a waterlogged field of cold, drenched, bloodied soldiers who mostly slept out in the elements. They huddled together for warmth and ate what few rations they had in their own personal belongings. Within 24 hours, the legions had found themselves back where they started the day before, but now in a far more dire situation. Things truly seemed hopeless. It's certain that many soldiers spent the night haunted by nightmarish visions of the aftermath of Teutoburg that they had discovered just a few months earlier. Surely it would be their skulls next that would be pinned to the trees. The men were so on edge that when at one point one of the surviving horses broke its tether and ran screaming through the camp, the legions panicked and attempted to swarm out of the gate, thinking that the enemy was closing in upon them. The entire army was on the verge of dissolving into a rout. The catastrophe was only averted by the quick thinking of Caecina. The general, aware of the latest reports and knowing that this was a false alarm, threw himself before the exit, vowing that the only way out would be over his dead body. The sight of their commander seems to have shaken the men out of their animalistic flight response. He took the opportunity to address the assembled mob in stride by proclaiming that beyond those gates lay death alone. Their only hope for survival was as a disciplined whole. As individuals, they would be picked off one by one. With these careful words, and perhaps an appeal to their remaining sense of honor, the men were backed down from the ledge of mutiny. The army would hold together one more night. Caecina knew that he would not have many more. A plan was thus devised that would make or break the legions. At dawn the next morning, the ramparts of the camp were all but empty. Some nervous sentries were posted, but it was obvious to the German scouts that the legions must be exhausted and on the breaking point, refusing to even commit to their usual full guard. They summoned a war council in the face of this new information. Arminius was cautious. He knew best that a cornered beast was at its most dangerous. Better to let it bleed out in the corner or set a trap along the escape routes than gamble on some unnecessary killing blow. However, his council was overruled by the other chiefs. This fight was personal to them. Many had lost friends and family over the last few years and were eager to see them avenged. They were done waiting. The fighting the day before had proven the Romans mortal. Their army bled. It was battered and broken, lying in a camp fortified with mere mounds of sod and a handful of guards. Now was the time to fulfill oaths. Now was the time to end this man to man. The Germanic tribes promptly massed their ranks and unleashed an all-out assault, each tribal chief leading their contingents into the fray. The vanguard moved quickly, with bundles of branches to fill in trenches and with tools to tear down anything that might slow the assault. Soon, they were at the ramparts, clearing it with volleys of javelins and scaling it with their hands or prepared ladders. Led by Arminius, they flooded into the camp. However, it became difficult to maintain cohesion of the force as it spread out in all directions to slaughter and loot mindlessly. This was exactly what Caecina had counted on. At this pivotal moment, he sounded the trumpets. Ranks of troops now emerged from their hidden positions, leading a counter-assault against the overflowing ramparts. They reclaimed the walls, with centurions carefully directing the men to repel fresh waves of tribesmen and to cut off those inside. At the same time, all surviving Roman horsemen rode out from the rear of the camp to strike at the Germanic horde from the flank beyond the wall. Additional gates were flung open, unleashing yet more formed cohorts which poured out to engage the main body of the enemy, forcing them into a set-piece battle. The Germanic tribes were caught completely off guard. They had expected cowering, half-armed men in a panic, not disciplined, organized legionaries. This misjudgment would prove their undoing. The legions now held the advantage of surprise and the ability to finally fight the type of battle they wanted. It was said that the Romans yelled out to the enemy, "None of your trees here, none of your swamps, just a fair field and fair gods." Channeling pent-up frustration and a fear of what might happen should they fail, the legions delivered a brutal, merciless counterpunch. The fighting would continue until the sun had set. Many Germanic chieftains were injured or killed, and Arminius only barely managed to escape. Under cover of night, they pulled back. Somehow, the Romans had snatched victory from the jaws of defeat. Yet Caecina knew that his great victory had only won him a bit of breathing room with which to escape. Should he linger, the tribes might be able to regroup and smash the legions which had expended the last of their energy in this desperate bid for survival. He therefore ordered them to march out immediately for the Rhine. After several long days, they finally arrived as a ragged, bloodied, exhausted column that could barely be recognized as a Roman army. During their absence, a panic had set in on the frontier, with many fearing another Teutoburg had occurred. Some even argued that the bridge over the Rhine should be destroyed to prevent a Germanic invasion. Luckily, Agrippina, wife of Germanicus, had forbidden such an action. She believed in the strength of Rome and dutifully awaited their return. As Caecina's troops finally stumbled into view, the Domina was there to greet them with coins, clothing, medicine, and food. They had survived. Germanicus, meanwhile, had been making his own return home along the northern coast. As his fleet approached a tricky patch of sea, 2 legions were disembarked and marched alongside the ships to facilitate the crossing. For a while, these advanced along a peaceful shore. However, strong winds soon bore down on them, and a severe tide drove the swells against them. I'll now quote an evocative passage from Tacitus. Quote, "His army was driven and tossed hither and thither. The country too was flooded. Sea, shore, fields presented one aspect, nor could the treacherous quicksands be distinguished from solid ground, or shallows from deep water. Men were swept away by the waves, or sucked under by eddies. Beasts of burden, baggage, lifeless bodies floated about and blocked their way. The companies were mingled in confusion, now with the breast, now with the head only above water, sometimes losing their footing, parted from their comrades, or drowned. The voice of mutual encouragement availed not against the adverse forces of the waves. There was nothing to distinguish the brave from the coward, the prudent from the careless, forethought from chance. The same strong power swept everything before it. At last, Vitellius struggled out to higher ground and led his men up to it. There, they passed the night without necessary food, without fire, many of them with bare or bruised limbs, in a plight as pitiable as that of men besieged by an enemy. For such at least have the opportunity of a glorious death, while here was destruction without honor. Daylight finally restored land to their sight, and they pushed their way to the river Visurgis, where Caesar had arrived with the fleet. The legions then embarked, while a rumor was flying about that they were all drowned. Nor was there a belief in their safety, till they saw Caesar and the army returned finally. In this way, the legions of Germanicus crawled their way back to their own lines. It was a dour note on which to end an otherwise glorious campaigning season. His men were battered in both body and spirit. In their current state, it would be impossible to carry on the fight. Luckily, this last dark chapter of the war had not yet reached the rest of the empire. As far as they knew, it had been nothing but inspiring tales of conquest. The provinces of Gaul, Spain, and Italy all now competed to offer men, horses, arms, and gold for the war effort. With these, the tattered remnants of the legions were renewed. Morale swelled as the general and his lieutenants made the rounds of the winter camps, visiting the wounded, rewarding the deserving, and showering all with praise. Veterans and raw recruits alike were assured that the ultimate victory was within their grasp. All it would take was one more campaign like the last. They made ready for war. The campaigning season of 15 AD had begun with the Roman armies plunging deep into Germanic lands, bringing the enemy to the precipice of defeat. Yet the final death blow could not be struck, as the invaders were forced to turn back with the coming of winter. It is now, with northern chill and barbarian steel striking at their backs, that a series of catastrophic blows would be dealt to the Romans in the matter of just a few weeks. Drowned in the storm waves or slaughtered in the bogs, the Romans were brought to within an inch of being wiped out, virtually erasing everything they had fought for. Only cunning generalship, luck, and sheer desperation would see any of them limp back home alive. To those battered survivors, the prospects of carrying on such a Pyrrhic war must have seemed impossible. However, the Empire had heard of their glorious exploits and now rose to support them with fresh waves of supplies and troops. Thus refreshed, Germanicus would now prepare to lead the legions on one last Herculean campaign to finish the job in Germania. While the legions along the Rhine licked their wounds, Germanicus and his officers were busy assessing the situation. Their messages calling for support from the nearby provinces were met with overwhelming responses, and now the quartermasters had their hands full receiving the vast quantities of goods making their way to the front lines. Over the winter, many of these would be stockpiled in large depots and prepared for transport. Meanwhile, the troops were also in a state of recovery. Rested, fed, and bandaged up, they no longer feared for their lives. Thanks to celebrations, the disbursement of spoils, and award ceremonies led by Germanicus, they even began to feel like champions once more. Good old imperial propaganda and their own fierce sense of competition ensured that many troopers now clamored for a fight. The Germanic tribes to the east were similarly building their forces. However, they would not be able to do so as quickly. Many of their coalition had been horribly wounded in the last campaigns. Those who were not dead or dying struggled merely to survive in a land that had seen its towns sacked, its fields burned, and its herds stolen. Arminius and the other chiefs would have been in fierce negotiation among their ranks to keep everyone committed to the cause, whilst also seeking out new allies. Thankfully, their near wins at the end of the 15 AD campaign made for a useful rallying cry to fan the flames of the resistance. Thus, as the months crept closer towards the start of the 16 AD campaigning season, both sides were geared up for one final climactic fight. As had occurred in the last few years, it would be the invading Romans who set the pace for the deadly dance that followed. This time, though, special considerations had to be made. After all, Germanicus had at his disposal over a quarter of Rome's legionary might, all concentrated in one place, which was too large to move as a single doom stack. Thus, he resolved to undertake a two-pronged assault, the main arm of which would consist of an amphibious assault along the North Sea. To this end, shipwrights and laborers had spent all winter building a massive armada of warships and transport vessels, which Tacitus states numbered over 1,000. Archaeology further backs this claim with evidence of an enormous section of the forest along the Rhine having been felled during this period. This fleet would be key for establishing not just the initial beachhead, but also the vital supply lines to keep the Roman war machine running. Its needs were titanic. Germanicus commanded an estimated 50,000 soldiers, with many more support units, pack animals, and camp followers, all requiring supplies. Basically, the equivalent of feeding a sizable city. By some estimates, this would have called for 165,000 pounds of grain a day. Strategically, moving this much material overland would have courted disaster, given the ease with which Germanic armies could raid and cut off such supply lines. Thus, it would be the very life-giving rivers of Germania that would serve as the arteries into which the Roman invasion force would be injected. While the ships were being constructed, Germanicus sent one of his lieutenants to once again engage the battered Chatti. These had not yet recovered from the previous year's beatdown, and the Romans had no pity in their hearts. The invaders swiftly took the Chatti out of the war for a second year in a row, only being slightly delayed by bad weather. Tacitus dismisses the move as pointless, considering that there really wasn't anything that they could loot. But the army group took the wife of the war chief hostage, ensuring that his spirit was as crippled as those of his people, most of whom lay dead in the silent forests. Germanicus himself then marched out with a different army unit, about 6 legions strong, to relieve the siege of a Roman fort that was still on the German side of the Rhine. When the besiegers heard that a full Roman army was bearing down on them, they melted away into the woods before the relief army had arrived. Germanicus, having accomplished his goal without any bloodshed, decided to take the initiative. After all, he was already across the Rhine with no apparent resistance. Why not push the advantage? Thus, while the amphibious invasion with their 1,000 ships got underway along the northern seas, the legions immediately set to work building infrastructure for the overland assault force. Starting from the position of the relief fort, they now built a defensive network of walls, towers, and bridges back to the Rhine. As they did so, elements of the northern fleet began to push their way upstream through the waterways of Germania. These were quickly able to link up with Germanicus. Now, transports bearing fresh supplies and troops refreshed the legions. For the individual troopers, hard at work with the Delabra, this must have been a huge sigh of relief. The dark forests and murky bogs that had haunted them the previous year were now being felled and filled. Meanwhile, watchtowers, patrols, and scouting parties confirmed that there was no enemy in sight. All nearby communities either fled or bent the knee. The army brimmed with confidence. When one tribe, the Angrivari, attempted to buck its Roman overlords, Germanicus immediately sent men to put it down. Tacitus, ever the Roman historian, condenses this activity into a single chilling sentence. Quote, "He sent Stertinius there with the cavalry and light infantry, so that their betrayal would be punished with fire and blood." Everything was going according to plan. However, the Germanic tribes would not go down so easily. They had realized the futility of holding the western banks of the Weser, and were rallying their forces on the eastern side, saving their full strength for now, watching waiting. As the Romans advanced their works to the Weser River and prepared to cross, the Carusi and their allies moved to intercept them. With Arminius at their head, they arrayed for battle. This tense standoff would finally be broken when the leaders of both sides rode to the river in a preliminary engagement of diplomacy. The river divided not just bitter enemies, but families. Arminius, the Romano-German traitor, stood opposite his brother Flaus, who had chosen to remain loyal to the invaders and had the scars to prove it. In a scene straight out of a Hollywood movie, the two would come face to face. Tacitus sets the scene for us. Quote, "That brother Flaus, by name, was serving in the army, a conspicuous figure both from his loyalty and from the loss of an eye through a wound received during Tiberius's term of command some few years before. Leave was granted, and Stertinius took him down to the river. Walking forward, he was greeted by Arminius, who, dismissing his own escort, demanded that the archers posted along our side of the stream should also be withdrawn. When these had retired, he asked his brother whence the disfigurement of his face. On being told the place and battle, he inquired what reward he had received. Flaus mentioned his increased pay, the chain of medals, the crown, and other military decorations. Arminius scoffed at the cheap rewards of servitude. They now began to argue from their opposite points of view. Flaus insisted on Roman greatness, the power of the Caesar, the heavy penalties for the vanquished, the mercy always waiting for him who submitted himself. Even Arminius' wife and child were not treated as enemies. His brother meanwhile urged the sacred call of their country, their ancestral liberty, the gods of their German hearths, and their mother, who prayed with himself, that Flaus would not choose the title of renegade and traitor to his people, to the kindred of his wife, to the whole of his race in fact, before that of their liberator. From this point, they drifted little by little into recriminations, and not even the intervening river would have prevented a duel had not Stertinius run up and laid a restraining hand on Flaus, who enraged was shouting for his weapons and his horse. On the other side, Arminius was visible, shouting threats and challenging his brother to single combat. He kept interjecting insults in Latin as he had service in the Roman camp as a captain of native auxiliaries. While the exact words of this verbal joust were likely manufactured by authors and should not be taken at face value, they do reveal some truths about the Roman perspective. Based on the arguments made by Flaus, we see imperial propaganda at work. This was not a war against the Germanic people. No, the quarrel was merely against the traitorous elements in their ranks. The Romans were merciful and generous masters, ready to greet any who laid down their arms as friends and allies. Of course, the brutality of the previous years would certainly beg to differ, but this was the game being played. After all, there were still many Germanic auxiliaries serving in the Roman military at this time, and imperial commanders clearly found some success in winning others to their cause with words, if not by steel. By trotting out the loyal, Germanic warrior Flaus, perhaps they might further induce others to give up the resistance before battle was held. Whatever the case though, it seems that the bulk of the Germanic tribes remained undeterred and formed a formidable battle line across the plain on the eastern banks of the Weser. Seeing this, Germanicus spared little time on further propaganda games. He immediately
I see they're using a better map. I mean, the Wikipedia map that I'm using. I could get that. I don't know, that whole series of Edging Varus. It's interesting because when they pretty much subjugated Germania, like it was being Romanized. France and Gaul was easier because they couldn't replenish their troops because you had the Atlantic Ocean right there, North Sea. And so basically you come up and you got German, Celtic, over time became Germanic, and then Germanic Scandinavian, so it's like one and the other, and then Celts basically stayed Celts, and up into Ireland and in Spain, northern Italy, or whatever. So it's like an early Proto-German and Proto-Slavic is German, but you can get really split hairs about that. But point being, the reason why Roman Empire was able to beat the Celtics, and goal, whatever, is because they were this culturally enough different, but they still got a lot of German tribe because they sort of kind of melded over into German at the time. But that physical barrier of the Atlantic Ocean and North Sea, so when Caesar came up, it was easy to be conquered, and it was able to be conquered, and so and Romanicized. But what they did was they depopulated it until, basically, what they're doing in Ukraine. They forcibly deported people, got people who are loyal to the empire to rule and everything. So when they went over Germany, they started the same process again. And they basically conquered it. It was conquered for all intents and purposes for like a generation. And they were basically culturizing it into Rome, and they wanted to be. But, they had various, he was adopted and everything else like that. That took a decade or so. And their interactions even go before that. But since they had German tribes going all the way, they conquered up until, the Romans conquered up until like Netherlands, just a little past Netherlands, and they had, inroads even further than that. But all those tribes are basically some sort of vassal states of Rome. But they just refused to like give in. They were going to fight, and they started pulling in other German tribes that are past, what would now be oh God, would be like Königsberg, Poland, like Czechoslovakia, that area. And so they had all that, and then that blended into like the wilderness of other stuff, right? So when something gets depopulated, they're like, oh, okay, let's go over there. And it just sort of naturally got replenished. And then with that fighting spirit, even though, they were basically conquered, they could still get their more replenished, So Teutoburg happened. This is my theory. Teutoburg happened, and really shook them because they did everything possibly to conquer it. They put all those Roman structures into it, and it just didn't work. They still decided to fight, and they got led into a trap by, by Varius or whatever, who was raised and knows their military tactics. So they did everything they possibly could, and still Teutoburg happened. And they're like, fuck this. We'll go back at it with Germanicus. And Germanicus went back at it and further depopulated it, whatever. And basically conquered it. They did everything the Roman Empire could possibly do. And for all intents and purposes, it was conquered, Again, even more so. But like I said, they still continue to fight. They are. And finally, Rome, even though they pushed so deep, Rome was just like, fuck this shit after time, It didn't say like they got scared of Germans. It was just like this belief over time. It was like, we keep doing everything we can, and they're just constantly fighting. It's just that the mentality just kind of set into Rome. Because Germany is going to do what Germany does. Finally, after a couple hundred years, the population in Germany replenished, and then you had Germanic invasions, and for all intents and purposes, people said, when did the Roman Empire die? It didn't really die, it just sort of kind of faded away because like Lombards came in, and they basically considered themselves Romans also, They're Germans. So, but it's just, and to the average person, they didn't know there was an empire or nothing. You know, they were told it's a republic. So they didn't know. I mean, they didn't have information and everything back in the day. And until anybody outside there, it's just like in Spain or France or whatever, they didn't have much of a say anyway. So then they're just like in an empire anyway. So them it's an empire. In Italy, it's a republic. You know, so it's just it was no difference to them. You know, at the top, you know, whatever came in, the culture just gradually shifted away into them. You know, something culturally will not hold unless there's strong political structure of that, you know, of that culture, or whatever, that defends it with the military. So you can't just say, well, this culture be ever endearing without any kind of self-defense. So that's and that's basically what happened with the Celts, you know, because they were so decentralized or whatever, they're able to be picked off one by one by one. The only thing that was left over the whole of Europe was just in Ireland. But anyways, long story short, I like that one with the fort. That's why I chose it. You know, it's like you always fight to the end. And then Germany, it's just like you can't beat Germany because they always decide to fight. And same thing with Ukraine. It's like you can't unless you totally depopulate it. You know, I'm talking about, and that's what they're doing. I'm trying to depopulate Ukraine, but this is basically what happens in every conflict or whatever historically. Russia is already taking people out and kids or whatever because they're going to be Russianized or whatever, you know, that kind of thing. And they're going to install Russian loyalists, you know, in Ukraine. Let me get a better map. I mean, so basically, I'll do a little bit. So, you know, I'm going to lose my train of thought. So that's what Russia's going to do. He's going to try and depopulate Ukraine. What they did in, you know, conquering whatever, like the Roman Empire did. And then just repopulate it, colonize it with other Russians. So you think, well, why are they killing them off or whatever? I mean, aren't they Slavic people? But if they're not loyal, then what's the point? If they're not going to follow Putin, then why does he need them? I mean, they're basically the enemy to Putin, so they need to be killed and removed, or they need to be, or get them before they're Ukrainian and while they're kids and everything. So because there's a large Ukrainian population already scattered throughout Russia, you know, right? And they gotta have mixed feelings. I mean, I'm pretty sure most of them are now just being fed the propaganda and whatever, and they'll trace their roots back to Ukraine. But one has to wonder, like, how do they really feel about it, you know? Like, to have part of you being conquered and told, like, you're the traitors, you know? Your heritage or whatever is, you know, needs to be conquered and eradicated. And when you have like Gorbachev and other people that have like summer homes in Crimea back in the day when it's part of the Russian Empire, it's just like it was all kind of blended. They're all like really close as people, you know, and family or whatever. But now they're told like their cousins are traitors and they need to be eradicated. Well, that's what we're doing. They're trying to just destroy everything and then fill it in and colonize and use that land. But the thing about it is, you know, with Russians, the thing about it is like all wealth of Russia goes to Putin. What he's getting from Ukraine and what he's losing is disproportionate. I mean, maybe over time, over 50, 100 years, it'd be, you know, it will be, you could rebuild it and get your money back maybe in a generation or something like that. But there's parts of America that suffered from a civil war that's still not like repopulated or whatever, you know? So it's just like defies reason because he will not see the benefits of that, you know, because it'll be totally destroyed. And then the amount of, the cost in money to conquer it, it's not going to be enough. Because usually, you know, you conquer it, to go to the other side. It's rarely you ever have to totally eradicate the population or whatever, but it does happen. But it's kind of obvious what's happening. You know, they're going to be forcibly deported to other parts of Russia where it needs to be industrialized. You know, like probably smaller towns and um, deep in Siberia, that kind of thing. You know, where they're just going to set up shop and farm or whatever else like that. You know, just that's what they do. And on our side, we got to sort of kind of think the same. A quarter of these Ukrainians are already displaced, and probably up to half of them is going to be displaced, and whatever percentage of that it's going to come into into Eastern Europe, Western Europe, and Eastern Europe, I guess, wherever. Eastern, being Poland, and then hopefully they can make the hard decision and be like, hey, just you don't want to burn Poland too much or whatever, because they're working overtime. They're highly aggressive on what's happening and everything, which is good. Someone's taking the initiative, but they go to like England and even Australia and New Zealand, whatever it needs to be, Canada and the United States, and we're accepting like 100,000. Well, might have to do even more, but if we accept more, like up to 1 million or whatever, we could do that. But we have to think exactly how the Russians think, but in reverse. We want to foster them, we want to nurture them so they grow, and we also want to build America at the same time. And what are the places in America that we need a population? This was West Virginia, Mississippi, and some of these other places that need kind of industry. Alaska and Hawaii. That need this work mentality, because out here it's not really American culturalized. A lot of whatever, it's de facto like a part of Asia, culturally and everything, and politically mindset, so you have that xenophobic Asian thing, whatever. And an influx of Ukrainians will offset that, because they already dealt with racism and could open people's mind of that more of that open democracy type of feeling and culture, whatever, right? So but this is how we got to sort of kind of think. Where in America do we just want to place them in overpopulated areas like the cities and everything? We want to place them where we need people, because it's been depopulated, because industry was lost in those regions, even around Chicago and where the Ford plants or whatever, those type of things. I'm not saying exactly there. I'm not saying, well, we got to sort of kind of think in advance, like where are we going to have industry, because we're going to try to bring it back. And you would stand to reason that would be where we used to have factories and have that kick-started to be like, hey, you're coming in from Ukraine, this is what we want to do, bring industry back, and we want to start a plant of all like high technology stuff made in America, where we could keep control of our IP, and all the lesser IPs and like simple products we could get wherever, so the more complicated it is, the more priority we want to have in America and build it American entirely and control those spot so we're not beholden on an adversary to actually make it. We shouldn't have like all our computer and technology built in Asia or whatever. That just makes no sense when we could perfectly do it here and have more control, and we could even increase that creativity and that innovation at a faster rate, because we're doing it ourselves and we have control of the whole process beginning to into the end user, and back again. That's what we need to do. So we have to think in these, how everything relates, instead of a burden making an asset, so instead of what they're doing, they're trying to kill and conquer, we're accepting them in, and then a portion that will stay in America, a portion will go back to Ukraine. And that's the whole thing about, what's happening in Ukraine. They're slowly gearing up and mobilizing everything, militarily speaking. Yeah, what's going to happen over time, they're going to have to rebuild everything. And the only way they're going to beat the Russians is not only on the battlefield, but is outbuilding them, fortifications and everything else. And then, and these people then as a country need to rebuild everything. So like, how are they going to rebuild everything? Well, everybody, instead of fighting, is going to be taught how to rebuild, I'm talking about. And so that's what you sort of got to do now, is like everybody has to be just constantly building fortifications and everything else, and then transition that into building apartments and houses and all that kind of thing. So it's the only way to gear it. You fully have the country involved in that process. That's why I was like, when I talk about, them digging in the subways and that kind of thing constantly, um, making, an area they could be secure from bombing. Because even in those subways, they could withstand a tactical nuclear blast. It's like 100 feet down. It's like the deepest subway in the world. So, and I know they want to stay in their houses because it's comfort, or in apartments where it's comfortable, whatever. But then it gets bombed. It's like this crazy mentality, whatever they have to choose from. Um, and I'm really kind of hesitant to tell people what to do, whatever. But that's what I'm really hoping they're doing, just constantly just doing that. And it's only for. It's not. And I don't see the conflict lasting forever. Everybody says it's going to be drawn out. Yeah, I mean, you can't really say that it's going to be a couple months like the Winter War, but it could be. But it's not going to be a 5-year war or anything they're drawn out to, where it's just ongoing. There will be a definite end to it because the will of the people of Ukraine are going to end it. So it's just like they're not half in it, and just do enough just to beat them back. And on our token, we can't. All the wars that we lost or whatever, we always titrated up so it's just enough, just to okay, instead of 100,000, instead of like 50,000, we'll send 60,000 and 70,000. We sort of, I'm talking about, sort of fought with this like poking at it instead of using our two fists as American fully mobilizing. We already got a country fully mobilizing, and we should match that spirit with what we could give to them. And so I definitely see a definitive end to it. But let me get this map up. But I was going to talk, I put this map up, just talk about Alexander the Great, Companion Cavalry. Delete. Then we want to say save image as. And you go over here. Hmm. My okay, I guess I'll just do it again. Okay, I gotta redo this. Give me a second. Window capture. Okay. I'm just studying my broker's test or whatever, so I just printed out. Relatively simple process. I made it straightforward information, everything. Nothing difficult. This, you got to do the tedious thing of reading it. So as long as you could read, you'll be able to do it. Hold on, let me just put the photo over there. PNG. There we go. I guess we want to increase it. Bam. All right, so then we just get this down to size. You don't want to see arrows, do you? Okay. Alright. I guess I could be over here. Shift myself over here. Or I could, can I move the camera? Or I could like sort of move the camera. So this is the newest map. I know what I was looking at. I was looking at the map of Kyiv. So we have the map of Kyiv. And I was watching this and I keep seeing this river right here. Right here. Where the Russians are at. And like I don't know what's happening on the ground. But it stands to reason that you could use this as a barrier and clear out this region right here. And they're probably using artillery that's closest to here. So every time you attack, that should be the goal up until the next river. Up until the next river. Like as Germanicus did, they used the river as the barrier, you know, as fortified. I mean, easier said than done, but you want to use that because they can't really go across. It sort of acts like they have to put all supplies across that, and then you cut that off again. You know, you counterattack up to that, and then you counterattack up to the next one. I mean, and it's probably actually going to be like urban areas too, clear out one urban area, then the next one. But some of these larger rivers you could definitely hold. Some of these are just streams, but you definitely want to see which ones that are cause like a bottleneck. If it causes a bottleneck, you know, certain places, whatever, and there's like 3 bottlenecks of where the Russians are, then you want to counterattack where those bottlenecks are coming in, and that way you could just hold those. Is what Russia's doing. They're slowly like resolving their supply lines and everything. And I was thinking like they're going to play like one handed, then the other, and then the other. But to me, I think they're going to try to get as much stuff as they can to regain the momentum, like they stated. And I'm seeing all these like experts and on. I was like, okay, you know, you take a good census of this, and there's a lot of, you know, good things out there, you know. So I'll speak on that. You know, basically it's 3 separate fights, and I was getting at that. You see that, and I wanted to see what's happening at this meeting too with all the world leaders. They're getting ready for like the worst case scenarios and everything. But my thing is that they're probably going to use conscripts and use Belarusian actually, you know, Belarus, you know, to also, you know, bolster where they are and use it all at once. And, you know, the mercenaries and even like chemical attacks. And I'm pretty sure the chemical attacks will be on Belarus to convince them, you know, because once what Russia and what Germany did was this nonstop black news or whatever to get them to look like they're morally justified and convince other people to fight with them, so they don't have to. Well, usually you don't want to get your hands dirty. You get other people and you try to manipulate the things and instigate. And you know, when you grow up, you always one thing we learned in the minority community, at least in Puerto Rican community, is just that you go after the instigators, whatever, and you end them, the people that constantly trying to cause shit, but like, look, you need to shut your mouth, whatever, you know. Yeah, not outsmarting nobody and everything. But in this case, you can't really do that because it's already at war. Anyways, long story short, so they're probably going to use chemical weapons initially or some sort of something to convince Belarus to come across. And then once you have that, you have justification to further use chemical weapons and whatever kind of thing on the Ukrainians, because Ukrainians already used them because it was a black flag thing, which is all already total bullshit. We all know that. Well, that's my thinking. So 60,000 Belarusians, probably going to come over. This one thing I want to touch on that, they're already given instructions how to like surrender or whatever, but I think it should be even more the processes and some sort of bigger structure and something in place where a Belarusian commander could come down, get Ukrainian citizenship, change sides or whatever, be able to just take all that equipment and be like, hey, fight for Ukraine. Instead of fighting your fellow Belarusians, whatever, you put them in the Donbass, Luhansk region, whatever, so they're fighting those separatists, so they don't have to fight each other, you know what I'm talking about? And that's usually what every country does. They take in other people's soldiers and put them on another front. We did that, Russia did that, Germany did that in World War II. We did that with Japanese over here, and the reason why is that like a Japanese Zero on Pearl Harbor came down, was shot down over Niihau, and he convinced a bunch of Japanese to fight for him. He convinced the Japanese to fight for him, and they held the family hostage, and this big Hawaiian got shot, grabbed the gun, was able to, save that family in Niihau. But in its secret records, whatever, they're like the Japanese, we'll go over the Japanese side, whatever, right? And so we realized this and we quickly enacted, their internment because loyalty concerns, whatever, right? And so what happened was that this was basically a smack upside the head to the Japanese community. You either fight for us or we intern you. And a lot of them were like, fuck this, you know what I'm saying? We'll fight for America. And they fought in Europe. And obviously they didn't want to fight Japanese because of loyalty concerns, because you're going to go where your blood is and where your culture is over there, unless you directly have engagement and interaction with it. And so that internment, to me, was a slap upside the head, I'm talking about. And it should have lasted as long as it did, but something needed to happen, because if they came aboard, there would have been a lot of, you just don't know what's going to happen because they already turned once or whatever. And it's a sad thing, because American culture is still not out here. And it's really kind of frustrating when you see people like, oh, well, sympathetic to me. You'd be all sympathetic towards the situation when you're still not American culturized. You still have these Asiatic beliefs of xenophobic of other people who are not Asian, and you still want to have that autocratic, superiority instead of a fully, eclectic mindset of democracy or whatever. You want to put that perception out, but in your heart you don't really feel that, and you just more want that perception even more. So you see it in America. In America, it's like, yes, you want to subdue racism and say you're not racist, and everybody's a little bit racist, but out here you could definitely see it more of that racist mentality, but for Asia, and it's not a game, I'm talking. You can't have it at that level and expect, democracy to really flourish out here. And that's the problem, because we have so much corruption. And there's so much corruption throughout Pacific region, South Pacific, because there's very small populations or whatever. But, it is what it is. But there's a lot of corruption out here because of that. And that xenophobic and towards your own, basically your own population, whatever Asian that is. And so even back in the day, it was more so like that, and it was quickly identified or whatever. And that's why that happened or whatever. But here in America, in the continental United States, we're more open-minded and eclectic. It was like, how could we possibly do that? Because we didn't understand that, this population over here still feels like that to a large extent or whatever. And even though we have this racism in America with the overthrow, or the attempted overthrow on January 6th, but it's not to a heightened extent. I'm talking about, like, it's not as it is over here. It's still there, and it's sort of like, how can I put this? It was what happened on January 6th sort of showed all of our racism, that Americans, half our population, could fall into this non-democratic feeling unless we engage with that other population. And thankfully, we have a lot better people, there's more good people than there are fucked up people. And it just showed that perception of being eclectic, of being of all cultures, of all accepting, is more facade, and you got to actually believe it. You actually got to put that out. It's like when I grew up being Native, I loved being Native, but everything I did was for Native people. I reached out to this culture. I reached out to that culture. And people like to undercut me. It's like, if you're really American, you wouldn't reach out to these other cultures. I'm brown, and I'm red actually, and I'm dark, and I was like, I could be mistaken for this culture, for that person. I use that to my advantage or whatever. And people didn't like me, hated that, because as a white person, you could only do it to white people. But I could also pull in white people because I grew up in a white family. I'm half white or whatever, whatever you want to say. I act white, I act Italian, however you want to say that. So there's really a lot of jealousy, people, trying to undercut me and pulling that rug or whatever. But like, oh, well, he's Buddhist or whatever, he's South Asian, he's Muslim, whatever, Arabic or whatever, or Middle Eastern or whatever, or Hindu, Shiva, and all whatever. And I was like, okay, if you think that of me, fine. What's wrong with that? They're all Americans. And then I'll just hit them with, saying by blood I'm Native American. So what's up? You already think they're not, but I'm more American than you. And I always just like hit them over the head with that, just shut them the fuck up, whatever, because they already got their head all big, whatever, that, well, I'm more American than you. I came over as a pilgrim and shit like that. I was like, well, I'm Native American. We got, what I'm saying? Well, you know what I'm saying? So I would argue them, talk right on the street and shit like that. But they would love to try to like associate me with something with non-American, because they just hated the fact that I'd be up in their face all the time, nonstop, boom, boom, what I'm saying? This, every time, I stepped out the door, what I'm saying? But long story short, there's enough good people that way, the bad people. And we sort of, as Americans, put out that we want to be this eclectic, all accepting. But in reality, in our minds, we all want it to be white or what your culture is, saying, well, I'm Native American. We're the best minorities out. We're the best population. We're the best community. We're equal to white, I'm talking about. Next community over, I'm saying, Latinos, Cubans, whatever. We're the best Latinos out. Better than all the other Latinos. We're equal to white, I'm talking about. But everybody else is below us. You move over, right? Irish, saying they're already white, but they don't consider themselves white. We're the best, minority out. We're equal to as white people. Italians, we're better than all other white people. We're not even white, I'm saying, but we're equal to white people. That's the mentality, whatever, it's everybody else below us. And you see this, right? And it's just like in Asia saying, oh, over here, we're Japanese, we're equal, we're better than all other Japanese. And I already knew this, and we're equal to white people. Everybody else is below us. So you see this, and it's even more so out here like that. So it's kind of funny to me because we have to get over that mentality and even regionalism, that this part of America is better than that part of America, whatever. And there's all this other nonsense. So we we want to put out that we are this multicultural, all accepting, but we have problems as Americans to really believe that. You know what I'm talking about? I'm not saying everybody, but as a whole, we obviously what happened January 6th. You know what I'm saying? It's just like we got to really instill that, you know. And I think being out here, me being multicultural, all accepting, and I could because inward would give me pride of my native blood. And I'd still even remember like growing up, you know, my sister being Colombian, she hated being dark, you know, I'm talking about. And I'm like thinking to myself, if I was Colombian and born outside of America and my people were outside America historically, I might feel the same way because I had mixed feelings. I was like, I was so lucky that I'm dark in this white community, whatever, and I'm dark for the right reasons, you know, because I have native blood. Because what 99% of what makes my dark skin is Native American, is my Native American heritage, and I'm very lucky. And sometimes it brings me to tears, you know, because I'm even darker than Mexicans. I'm darker than Central Americans, you know, I'm talking about. And people's like, oh, you got to be that. I'm like, my blood is dark because of north of the Rio Grande, you know. So it's just like, it fills you with this immense pride that no one can take away because they want to associate with something foreign, and they do everything you can because they don't want to lose in an argument. They don't want you to say you're better, you're more American. They want to say I'm a more American, but I throw it right back in their face, and they can't stand that, you know what I'm talking about. And again, I fall into that trap of, you know, we want to be accepting, all accepting, but here I am saying, boom, I'm this, whatever. But you have to defend yourself, you know. I can't lie to them. I'm not going to be like, I'm fucking Sri Lankan or some shit. I'm not going to say I'm Vietnamese or whatever the fuck it is, you know. I mean, nothing wrong with them, but I had a girlfriend that was Puerto Rican Vietnamese. The dad hated me. He was a Green Beret. I didn't know they were a Green Beret friend. Whose dad, his son was Puerto Rican. I didn't Green Berets, anyways. He was cool. He told me all kind of shit. His son was like a Latin king. Like, anyways, I'm not okay. I'll stop. But he's the one that's like really down to earth. Like what happened in Vietnam with the native people, you know. And then he saw us, you know, just a small group of Latinos and Puerto Ricans. He's like, you're all very tight, you know, they might have 100, 200 people sometimes, but having a small 6 dozen people, you could beat them in detail. You get outnumbered at that time. How long is it going to take for them to call? It wasn't back in the day we had cell phones and everything. It took time, you know. You do your thing, took 5-10 seconds, and you're out. You know what I'm talking about? That's all it was. That's all you need is to outnumber somebody for 5-10 seconds, and it's done. You know what I'm saying? But you always take on a larger force. You know, I mean, this is our country. Being native, this is who we are. You know. And they hated that. They wanted us not to be like that. And I think that's what it was. Like everybody wants to associate with Native and Puerto Rican because that argument. And we have this legitimate gripe of wanting to, that we were colonized. So our anger comes from a legitimate place, but that could be corrupted easily or whatever. And that morality that you have when you're younger, that it's okay to be a criminal and all this other shit and do all this other stuff, and it takes a long time for that to leave your system, and sometimes it never leaves your system, and it's an issue, but it's hard to explain to other people. But it is what it is. But my point is, what happened with the internment, you know, and historically other populations fight in other regions. So when the Belarusians come down, there has to be a better process in place. They get all that men and equipment and put it into a region that's more effective and all that. And I don't want to start using big words like where it's applicable and all this other shit I already got. If I don't know a word totally in its entirety, I'm gonna get myself into trouble. You know what I'm talking about? So I'm very careful with the words I use, now. So use some big ass word. And just one little detail that's missing could mean something else. Like you have this epiphany or whatever, right? And it's like, okay, well, I used to thought I was like the perfect example of something, but now it's like a watershed moment of changing or whatever. You know what I'm saying? So let me quickly use the bathroom, or not so quickly. I wanted to put in something about Caesar's companion cavalry or whatever, but I guess I could play something.
It is the year 262.
Oh, this is Game of Thrones.
It's September of the year 331 BC. After taking Phoenicia,
Here we go.
it's September of the year 331 BC. After taking Phoenicia in Egypt, Alexander marches east to the inland of the Persian Empire. As his troops were about to cross the Tigris River, he received scout reports that Persian king Darius had gathered another huge army and was preparing for a decisive encounter with the Macedonians. Both armies finally met on the vast open field near the village of Gaugamela in a final clash between the two biggest powers of classical antiquity. It's the beginning of the year 331 BC. After the successful subjugation of Tyre and Gaza, the Macedonian army took some time to regenerate in the rich valley of the Nile. The Egyptian satrap didn't oppose Alexander, as the Macedonian was seen as a liberator rather than an invader, since Egypt wasn't the most loyal of Persian provinces. After the crushing defeat near Issus, Persian king Darius changed his approach and tried to stop Alexander's extraordinary conquest by using diplomacy. Yet the Macedonian king refused Darius's increasingly generous terms thrice, and with winter passing by, started to draw the plans for the upcoming Babylonian campaign. With all preparations completed, the refreshed and decently supplied Macedonian force marched out back to Phoenicia in the beginning of April. It's worth noting that Alexander paid significant attention to the often overlooked logistical part of his conquests. Maintaining such a considerable force in excellent shape for many years far away from home required exceptional planning and stellar management. For as long as it was possible, the Macedonian army stuck to the coast and utilized the fleet to take care of provisions. Darius was well informed of the Greek movement, and by the time Alexander crossed the Euphrates, the new Persian army was being assembled. The King of Kings expected the Macedonians to march along the river straight to Babylon and decided to use scorched earth tactics by ordering the plunder of the Euphrates Valley. But thriving cities lying close to the river were decently defended, making supply gathering quite challenging. So Alexander chose a northern route instead, which, although longer, had rural settlements that offered easy access to food and water. Upon hearing the unexpected news, Darius instantly departed Babylon heading north along the east bank of the Tigris River. He appointed a strong mounted unit under Mazaeus, governor of Babylon, to guard the northern crossing of the Tigris and plunder its east bank to hinder the Macedonian march. But Mazaeus failed to challenge the Greeks during the crossing, and in the middle of September, Alexander reached the east side of the river. Darius knew that the encounter was close, so he started to seek a suitable place for the upcoming battle. He set up camp on a wide plain near the village of Gaugamela and began preparations. In the meantime, Alexander's troops caught a Persian scouting party and found out that Darius was camping 30 kilometers to the east. The Macedonian king quickly dispatched his own scouts and advanced towards the enemy. Camp was set behind a hill about 10 kilometers away from the presumed battlefield, and after a few days' rest, on the last days of September, Alexander departed towards the Persian positions. The hill between the two armies was guarded by Mazaeus' detachment, but upon seeing that the whole Macedonian army was approaching, the Persian noblemen simply retreated without a fight and rode back to the camp, yielding the hill. Having the hill was an advantage, but Darius still held the open fields which suited combat for his larger army far better. So the hill was important, but an acceptable loss. Alexander took the hill, and, after a short examination of the environs, decided to set a temporary camp there. This maneuver gave him a significant advantage, as the higher ground provided a good view of the Persian camp and their troop deployment. Moreover, the hill was well suited for defense purposes, so Alexander didn't rush and comfortably prepared for the battle, making sure his troops were well fed, rested, and in good mental condition. In comparison, due to Mazaeus' failure, Darius was under constant threat of sudden Greek attack, even at night, so his troops had to maintain readiness for battle. Of course, Darius had superior numbers, plenty of solid cavalry, and suitable terrain, but his army could do nothing but wait for the Macedonians to make the first move, as storming the ridge was not a viable option. The sun slowly set on the horizon, while Alexander discussed the upcoming battle with his officers. It is said that his second-in-command, Parmenion, advised a night attack in order to catch the Persians off guard, but Alexander turned down this idea as too risky. The Macedonian command then agreed to attack the next day in the morning. The night passed by, and the first sun rays lit up the battlefield. It was the 1st of October. The Persian army was already in battle formations, as they spent the whole night waiting for the Macedonian attack, which never came. Darius efficiently used the manpower of his vast empire. Up to 100,000 men were gathered to fight for their king. 10,000 of the professional immortal infantry, together with a few thousand Greek mercenaries, formed the core of the Persian center. But the real power of Darius's army was positioned on the flanks. More than 30,000 fine cavalrymen from various Persian satrapies posed a serious threat, especially on such a wide and level battlefield. Darius also had a few hundred Indian scythe chariots and even 15 elephants, though these animals probably didn't take part in the battle. The rest of his army was formed by various infantry units gathered from tribes inhabiting the Achaemenid Empire, though their battle potential was questionable. Due to the size of the Persian army, the command was split between Darius and his trusted generals, Mazaeus and Bessos. We could spend another 5 minutes discussing the exact positions of Bactrian cavalry or Parthian infantry in the Persian battle line, but as in battle, time is of the essence, and at this point the sun was near noon. Oversleeping Alexander finally awoke, and the refreshed Macedonian army abandoned the hill and began their deployment. 40,000 infantrymen and a 7,000-strong cavalry detachment formed a slanted battle line, with the right flank facing the front of the Persian center. To avoid possible encirclement, both flanks were sufficiently reinforced and slightly curved backwards. The Macedonian center was occupied by a disciplined Sarissa phalanx, supported by solid Hypaspist units. Cavalry was split between both flanks, Thessalian units on the left and companion cavalry on the right. The second line was occupied by Thracian and Illyrian infantry. Just like in previous battles, the command was split between Alexander and Parmenion. To achieve a flanking advantage, the Macedonian king started to move his line right, but Darius immediately countered by stretching his left flank and matched the opponent's movement. Darius had the battlefield leveled and cleared off any obstacles for more effective chariot use, which is why he wanted to prevent the Macedonians from leaving the prepared ground. Persian cavalry moved out and attacked Alexander's far right. Fierce fighting began with no clear winner, but as time passed, Macedonian cavalry prevailed and routed some of the Persian units, though suffering serious damage. Seeing the trouble on his left, Darius sent all his chariots to storm the Greek center. Yet this attack wasn't particularly successful, as defenders opened their ranks and allowed attackers to ride through the line, raining javelins on them at the same time. Following the chariots, the Persians' right flank, led by Mazias, stormed Parmenian's side, killing many Greeks in the process and forcing the Macedonian commander to give ground. Parmenion was in serious trouble, being outnumbered and partially enveloped. But it wasn't the first time he was forced to fight at unfavorable odds. His flank fought bravely and somehow endured the Persian push, though at a high cost. It was at this point that Darius noticed that Alexander was moving his flank to the right, while Parmenion stayed on the left, creating a gap in the Macedonian center. The Persian king saw this as a weak point and impulsively sent his immortal units to exploit the opening. But this was bait. Doing so exposed Darius's own center. Alexander had waited for such an opportunity. He swiftly moved companion cavalry supported by the remaining units of his flank and struck the Persian center, right where Darius's exposed royal guard stood. Despite the support of the second-line units, the impetus of the Macedonian charge quickly broke the Persian line. Soon, Darius realized the danger, and just as he did 2 years earlier, fled the battlefield. Alexander began pursuit immediately, but soon overturned his temptation and rode back to relieve Parmenion's flank. Fierce combat still raged on the Macedonian left. When rescue finally came, the remaining Persian forces were soon overwhelmed and routed. Although Darius managed to escape yet again, complicating Alexander's political plans to crown himself as the king of Persia, the military power of the Achaemenid Empire was crippled. Macedonians had the core cities of Mesopotamia and Persia at their fingertips. After the brilliant show of his strategic and tactical prowess near Gaugamela, Alexander effectively ended the hegemony of the powerful Persian Empire in less than 5 years. But its subjugation didn't satiate his lust for power, and his story is yet to be continued. Three months had passed since the great Macedonian victory over the Persians near Gaugamela, and Alexander now marches his troops straight to the heartland of the Achaemenid Empire. He takes his best men and tries to force his way through the mountain range, the last barrier between him and Persia proper. The Macedonians didn't expect much resistance at this point of the war, yet one of Darius's loyal satraps was in charge of stopping Alexander's advance, while the King of Kings gathered a new army to face the invaders. An unexpected encounter between the frozen peaks of the formidable Zagros Mountains is just about to happen. It's late October of the eventful year of 331 BC. The bad news about Darius's crushing defeat
Got some coffee. Okay. I know in that battle, there's like one time Alexander the Great didn't really use his Hippalian cavalry. I mean, he did use it how effectively, obviously, because he routed Darius. But usually, what he does with his Hippalian cavalry, everybody pretty who knows a little bit about military history, that's just like his personal bodyguard, and he selected those. Obviously, we could, they're bigger than normal Greek. Greeks probably being about 5'5". I don't know how tall Alexander the Great was. Was he 5'5"? Somewhere around there, 5'5", 5'6". But usually they're probably pretty big, 6 foot. I know some of them in Herodotus was saying, they stood a head or two taller than Alexander the Great. So maybe like 6'3", 6'6" of them, like really big people. So you're thinking like how Alexander the Great didn't die in all these battles, that he had hundreds of these people and probably like a select group of like a few dozen, maybe 100, 200 of that size, just always around them. So when you're like fighting with your sword and you got someone that's a foot and a half taller than you just coming down on you with all that muscle, there's no way they're touching Alexander. There's no way. You know what I mean? So I never like dealing with people, never trying to be friends with anybody smaller than me growing up. It's like I already know how tough of a time I am being my height, so this is too much. You got to hold your own, and you know what I'm saying? So I sort of get it. Anyways, but he didn't use it as he typically does. He has this mass cavalry, and he always formed a wedge, so there'd be a battlefield, right? And he would try to, and if he's outnumbered, if he sees some place where he's winning, and another unit's going to come in to help, he would drive a wedge right through it and force that to be a battle over here. The individual battle over here, that'd be an individual battle over here. So he never really engaged. He just drove a wedge and he would force it apart and hit stragglers and everything like that. And sometimes he would fully engage, but that's not what he usually intended for. It was constantly dividing the battle, going where he was needed or whatever, that kind of thing. And going up and be like, hey, go over here, tell that commander, in force and everything. So he constantly divided when he was on the battlefield. And that's primarily what he did. And then a moment of opportunity, he would engage in the battle, whatever, that kind of thing. So that's what companion cavalry constantly did. So think about that. He separated the battlefield. And so we think in that context, and you could get into other ways of deep. I know there's people that get into way deeper thing, but yeah, but so that's what you want to do in Ukraine. They're already saying it's separate battles, and the Russians didn't anticipate all this command and control. Let me put the map up. They didn't really anticipate them to make as little gain as they thought. But I think there's a consensus that cannot be ignored with everybody. We could do blue. That there's 3 basic battles going on. I mean, they're all interlinked and everything. Don't get me wrong, but the more you can divide those 3 areas of operation, the better, right? Because then you could beat it in detail, and then they can't share resources, right? So I don't know, like how, in reality that really is happening, because, but I keep saying that, they're having, supply issues and all that other stuff. So if you keep it, and you're going back and destroying the supply lines, but what you don't want them to is to link up as much as possible. You always want to delay. You know what I'm saying? So if there could ever be strong points, dividing it, the better, So if you want to focus on those towns in between these major areas to further it. I mean, can't use it cavalry, whatever, right? But make sure that you're attentive to it more so than whatever. How it plays out in reality, I don't know, but that stands to reason that you, if they're already separate fights, then further it so you could beat each one in detail. You know, you focus over here and then over here and then over here instead of everywhere. Because if you're defending everywhere, you're defending nowhere, right? And that kind of thing. If they're attacking everywhere, you see what's happening. You know, it's just like, we'll win. We don't have to, you know, talk to each other and everything. But I don't know. I guess like if you see stragglers or whatever, that's probably carrying from one area of operation to the other. It's probably some kind of, it might be something that other area operation desperately needs. And if it's out in the open, it's an easy kill. They need it, and you're furthering, you know, supply issues, whatever. So extra attentive, just don't let it go. Take it down, you know. As if it's by itself, take it down, boom. You do even more so. So it's even more of a better target than you think, you know. It's just not just, okay, well, one little truck going from one area to the other. It's just like, there's probably a reason for that, you know. I don't know, that's just my thing, a random thought. I don't know how often that happens, you know. I don't know. Like how would that look like? How do you separate it? You know, put more fortification, put more weapons in, more truck tires, you know. You know, that's, I keep seeing those truck tires and I was like, why do they have truck tires or whatever? Then I realized I don't know, it's 60s, 70s, was it 50s? I don't know. Sometime someone was shooting at tires and realized, oh wow, this is bulletproof. And that's where we got Kevlar from, because if it could withstand, you know, the heavy load of a truck and still be on the road and be flexible, then obviously could stop a bullet because that constant force, right? Because it's rubber already, so it already gives a little bit, and it gets to the Kevlar, and then boom. So that's how we have better stuff than Kevlar now, whatever. But we got Kevlar from truck tires and everything, not regular tires, but so you know, if you get old truck tires, right? Give it to Ukraine. They'll make fortifications at it. You know, just rolling. Just those odd things that you don't really think about. There's so much odd stuff that, you know, that just people don't think about that will help the war effort. And you keep seeing those have fortifications, like excavators and bobcats and stuff like that. Put all the bobcats you fucking could get at the front, you know, so you just keep digging, you know, smaller. You know, I'm talking about, instead of someone just like constantly whatever, because you want to build fortifications as close to them as possible, because soon as, and that's another thing that people keep stating, like that it's static and it's dangerous, you know. Obviously that's something that would settle in after, I don't know, a few weeks, a month, 2 months or whatever, you know. But it's only been a few days or whatever before they're stating that, you know, they're regrouping, whatever, you know. And so obviously it's just like this, because there's nothing happening or nothing big happening, and it's just like, you want to say stalemate, but that's very dangerous, because then you're creating something that's not, you know, that is just the mentality in itself is dangerous, because it's not fluid, and you want this fluid movement of in everything you do, whatever. But you need to say something on TV to say, okay, it's stalemate. But I'm glad there's pushback, like, oh no, there isn't, because it isn't. You know, it's just too early to state that. When you see de facto no man's land and that kind of thing, and granted, you're going to see a few across the way, whatever, but it's never going to be more than probably a week or two at the most, or whatever. You know, talking about as that's the around about where it takes to regroup. I don't know, something of that nature. But in that time, you definitely want to build. That time, you want to build your defenses. You know what I'm talking about? So it's just like, you got to understand that. You know what I'm saying? So it might look like it to an outside person, and here I am, you know, in Hawaii, you know, but I'm just stating my opinion. You know, so I agree with people saying that it's not a stalemate. I say it's a lull in the fighting. And when there's a lull in the fighting, you want to use that time to resupply also, build up your defenses, reorganize it, get your shit straight, apply pressure where you can, you know, because you want to blunt what's coming. And I think what's coming is going to be what they have, because they're going to want to slowly attrit, obviously the Ukrainians down. And some argument who are pro-Russian say, it's a done deal for the Russians. They got Ukraine, and some people more in the center are like, it's a slow grind or whatever, right? And if they keep applying pressure, yeah, but for the realists out there, the Russians are going to lose. I mean, but I'm not saying the Russians can't win, but it's just not, this is not reality, because we already know it's a logistical thing, and we are resupplying them, and they have the well fight. So that's all I'm saying. And as long as we continue doing that, the Russians are going to be attrited. And I know what the Russians are about to do, sort of. They're using the Ukrainians as a firing squad, and they're going to get people from center of Asia and far east of far east Asia, those Russians that are not Slavic or whatever, and they're just going to put those deplorables and conscript them to fight in there and use it as a firing squad to basically kill off their non-Slavic people that they have in the country that are not Russian. So it's this very cold genocidal thing that's happening. And they're going to slowly try to attrit and gain territory from the Ukrainians. And Russia typically takes a few months to mobilize. And what Putin's going to do, he's going to get his loyalists of, they believe in his empiric view, or whatever, like that type of thing. And it's to get into his mindset. So he already made a statement that they're not even Russians. They're basically just how Hitler felt. If they don't want to fight for Russia, then fuck them. I don't need them. They're not German. They could die. I'm talking about they deserve to be killed. So they got to fight for Germany. And he mobilized and that's what Hitler did. I mean, everybody looks at what Hitler did in his death camps and killing Jews and gypsies and everybody else, and the political dissidents. What else did he kill? Invalids, mentally disabled, homosexuals, anybody that wasn't the perfect Aryan. And just gypsies, right? Did I say gypsies? They nearly killed off all the gypsy population in Germany, or whatever, I think, and I don't want to get into semantics about proportionally how much they killed, but it's just an odd factoid I was about to state, but that's not important. Some people mistake me when they know I'm Spanish, like 40% Spanish. Oh, he's gypsy. No, I'm not gypsy. Well, then they want to say I'm fucking Catalan or whatever it is. What the fuck, that place up there? Hold up, now I'm kind of pissed off. Ethnics of Spain. I know where it is. 1 second. It's better that I look it up and just state something. I don't like to state a term out of context.
It's spring of the year 375.
I have to state I'm Basque. And technically I'm like, it says like I'm 10% Basque. 10% Portuguese. Get all like technical. And then they get like Andalusian. Somehow that's not Spanish. I'm like, okay. Then it says like I'm Northern Leon, Spanish. I'm like, okay, well that's just Ireland or whatever. I'm like, okay. So the same Spanish, you know what I'm talking about? It's like, because Portuguese, I mean, I guess it would be Portuguese and Spanish or whatever. It's only because Aragon and Castilian Spain, you know, Elizabeth, it was Elizabeth, no, it's England. Who sent, it was Ferdinand, and who was Aragon, and the Castilian, they married or whatever, and that became Spain. And then if the other person married Portuguese, that would have been Spain, and Aragon would have been out in there. It would have been like Aragon, it would have been Spain, and then Aragon or whatever. So, and then gradually Portuguese, you know, became Portuguese or whatever. And if you really look, there's like Catalan, you know, it's like, it's all ridiculous, right? So, but I told someone else, is like, I'm like a good portion Portuguese, and they're like, okay, you know, locals get all. I probably have more Portuguese blood than the Portuguese out here. Nah, not really, but I do have enough to, you know, start a conversation about it. And if it doesn't build a bond, I don't give a fuck. Like people wearing a New York Yankees cap, like that's football. Yeah, yeah, that's football, dude. It's football. No, it's not football. Just if you can't, you know, you can have someone from New York come up to you, man. You can have that. That's what I do. I should just come up, grab their hand if they don't want to fucking do it. That's what I'm gonna do, man. It's gonna do it. Wear the hat. Coming for you. Coming for you. Gonna force some interaction, engagement from you. You go bitch to the police. And I'll just laugh. And that's what they do, is they want to associate me with something out there. And there's Asians do that. I'm like, no, man. Your first generation, have some kind of knowledge about what you put on yourself, whatever. Because that's to build a bond, a connection with people so they could sort of identify. You have something in LA, but oh, you're from LA. You know what I'm talking about? You have an LA Rams or whatever, you know what I'm saying? Know something. Know who the quarterback is. You know what I'm talking about? Know whoever, so I could be like, hey, you know, my quarterback, you know what I'm saying? Whatever, you know, Eli Manning and, you know, my running back or whatever. Let me say something, you know, have a conversation, you know, that's what it's about, you know. That's how you have pride in your area, you know what I'm saying, that you know something, you know. Know nothing and just have it on. It's like, oh, I was supposed to be like, it's just, these things need to develop your personality, your social engagement, you know what I'm saying? But it's just like, oh my God, you don't, it's just so isolated out here. It's just, they know of the things, but they didn't know, like, to actually do it, you know. And it's grinding me down because now I'm becoming like that isolated. It's like I don't want to be as eclectic or whatever, and I just want to throw out, and I'm native even more so, whatever, you know, so I'm worse than I was growing up because, you know, instead of reaching out, I'm just like, I got more native blood too, so I don't want to hear your dumb ass shit, you know what I'm saying? You just want to say I grew up in Hawaii, therefore I'm Hawaiian, but that makes you native. Doesn't make you blood. You just want to do that to win an argument or whatever, but your heart is not. When push comes to shove, you're not going to throw down for like native causes, whatever, you know what I'm saying? This is really frustrating because you shouldn't have respect. You should just do it, you know what I'm talking about? Regardless what people think about you, you know? Because that's your people. That's who you are, you know? That's, you know, I'm talking about, you know, what happened historically in America, you know? Why they don't have a larger community. They need to stay connected, you know? And America forces us to be disconnected, you know what I'm talking about? And so if you're furthering that disconnection, how can you say you're furthering native? Because you just, as soon as someone pushes through, you know, your facade of saying, oh, I'm this, I'm that, or whatever, you are going to go towards, you know, what your blood is, you know, being Filipino or whatever. Like, dude, don't do that. Don't have all these tattoos or whatever. You know what I'm saying? There's something behind all that. Just, that's what so frustrates at me, you know what I'm talking about? It's just like, you don't know that it's you're appropriating another culture and you're hurting the actual people who are blood that culture, of that, or blood that race, you know what I'm talking about? But you want to push that it's culture. But, you know what I'm saying? That's community and family and blood, you know? Like you're bringing down. So, you know, it's just like, we're facing off with a bunch of Italians and Irish, and here's just a small group of, you know, Puerto Ricans, and we get in a fight, you know, they call out one person, and the next person gets called out, sort of kind of on size and weight. And then all of a sudden, you know, people want to not hold to these little, based on honor and respect, you know, between, you know, these, you know, three group of people, you know, talking about at the Jersey Shore, and what they think is just image and perception, you know, we gotta look hard or whatever. You don't understand, like, if my brother gets hit or whatever, that damages me, you know, I'm talking about, like, he has to walk around with that black eye. Then, you know, I'm talking about like, okay, well, even though he won that fight, he got a black eye and look hurt. I was like, then we could all do that. He looks weak or whatever. So we try to prevent, you know, things like that as much as possible, you know what I'm saying? Try to make it as fair as possible. You don't have like scratches and shit like that. This is like dumb shit or whatever, but the fact of the matter is like, people were surprised once you try to like not honor what we already had, you know, sort of get it within size range or whatever, and you want to get it and try to make it look something that's not. The whole family gets involved, you know, I'm talking about the uncles and everything are there. You know, I'm not going to say, I don't want to drop a name, whatever, but, you know, a pregnant lady picked up a bat, wanted to get involved in this shit, you know, it wasn't even a joke, you know, it was just run at it, you know, it's a very big pregnant Puerto Rican woman, you know, I'm talking coming at you, you wonder why. It's just like, this is family, you know what I'm saying? We don't want them to do it as you're supposed to, but to you, you want respect and honor or whatever you want to look hard. But this is not even a respectable thing. Choosing to cause violence on someone else is, you're basically saying you're not human. And that's basically what you're doing when you're calling us out and we're already fighting. And then the simple things we're asking, you're not even doing. And push comes to shove, you're going to defend people, you know, based on blood, because it's not image at that point. It's not a perception. It's not, you're not trying to look cool. You're just trying to protect people, you know? And then people who weren't normally going to fight, you know, all the Latinos and other Puerto Ricans we didn't get along with. But I mean, I'm going to say wouldn't fight for us, but kind of neutral. Now, let's put it like they were more neutral. We didn't fight. There's three main groups of Puerto Ricans at the Jersey Shore, but two of them were always kind of neutral, whatever. Then, but they sort of, you know, kind of helped or whatever. Well, I'm not gonna get it. Anyways, other people were on the sidelines, saw her coming out, and that forced them to defend themselves, you know, talking about, and before she even got touched, like people were just rushing them, you know, talking about how it's like, dude, we can't have her being touched, you know, she's pregnant, it's not a joke. And they're like, oh, she's not, no, she's pregnant, dude, it's not a joke. We're not trying to bullshit you, you know, we're not always trying to put on this like hyperbolic, gaslit, you know, habitual lying thing that, I'm not saying it all the times, but the Italian groups definitely did that. That everybody's putting out. You know, it's just like you get into that mentality, you think everybody else is in that perception, but when push comes to shove, everybody's gonna defend what your blood is, what your culture is, you know? You know, just like, and I see that child now, like on like Facebook or whatever. It's just like something just went like slightly off, you know? You know what I mean? It's like, fuck. Because when it happens, you could get back to your white picket fences, whatever, but we still have, well, all we have is each other, you know? And these are the things people were like, well, they were defending who they are and they have no choice. And that people want to associate that, you know, these, and granted, a lot of us have corrupted morality or whatever at the time. And now we're grown and we do the right thing and we got businesses or whatever. And we were all Latino. We had, you know, a few Black, few Irish, Italians, and everything. So it wasn't like one culture against the other, but for the most part, they were mostly Irish. They had one or two Black dudes or whatever. The Italians were all Italian, and they had this one Puerto Rican. Sort of, she died of an overdose in high school. But for most part, it's like kind of like that, kind of like separated. Most aggressive of each community that were like 100% Irish, 100% Italian. But my point is, being Native American, you know, it's just, things happen in your community, things happen in the Latino community that you have to defend against, right or wrong. And it comes from something of being colonized. And when you choose to do it, defending yourself immorally, that's your own decision. You chose to do something illegal. But I know where it comes from. But what gets me is when it's appropriated, that anger, that motivation, and it's not given to the community that needs it. You know, that's where my I guess that's where my rant is about. Because to most people, it's a perception that I'm part of this community that will be very motivated, you know, very active, very what it is, whatever you want to call it, gains attention. But I know where it comes from. It's being colonized and speaking out about it, and all the other, you know, things that emerge from that, creativity too. Yes, you know, and all that other good stuff. But so my point is that you shouldn't appropriate, and because I'm gonna go up to you and be like, hey, how you doing? I'm talking about, and there's no bomb because I could do that in Jersey. But hey, how you doing? Boom, 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 done. And then when you get out here, you occasionally see that, and half the time, it's from Jersey, New York, and that happened to me when I first came out here in the late '90s, whatever. But now it's just like, okay, you're from over here. That's cool, whatever. You know what I'm saying? And now it's just you just wear a fucking hat, and it's like there's nothing behind it. I'm like, what the fuck, dude? You know what I'm saying? It's just like you gotta. Not that I have anything wrong with it, but I'm gonna. You gotta be cool, man. For real, man. It's just how it is. It's just knowing that someone is going to, and I'm not a shy person, you know what I'm saying? So it's just like, you could bullshit the people around here, but I'm past the point of bullshitting, I'm talking about. I used to do all that my whole life, I'm talking about growing up before the Marine Corps. And it's gradually, and I made the decision not to do it. And it's not like it was a switch one day. I would love to say that, but it gradually left my system. And I guess being out here, it's still you never learn that lesson because you grow up quicker when you're in a violent situations constantly. I'm talking about you learn that being honest and truthful wins out than just being total bullshit. And it sort of sinks in, usually, if you're smart. And is just really extremely frustrating. And if you're able to bullshit around here because no one confronts you or adjusts you or does whatever, then I come up to you, I'm gonna be like, look, dude, that's not cool. Whatever. What about everybody else? You know what I'm saying? You're taking that. You're trying to absorb everything that's cool. I get that. Everybody does that. I did that growing up. All the warrior cultures, I'm talking about. Templars, Janissaries, Samurais, I'm talking about. All those tough Klingons, talking about all those tough people. Klingons. And you want to absorb that into yourself, you know what I'm saying? All these, you want to take all the cool shit. I get that. Me, I hid the fact that I was Hopi Navajo, and I didn't know I was Apache at the time. I hid that. I said I was Mohawk Indian. I get it. You know what I'm saying? I totally understand it. Even my sister was like going to reservation. She knew more about Navajo than I was. I mean, I told my close friends, but everybody on the periphery, I was Mohawk. Still have it to this day. And to tell you the truth, a Mohawk is actually is a Plains Indian, and I'm part Plains Indian too. So, not a derivative. Well, it's a derivative of the Sioux, of the Lakota. Navajo was a Plains Indian, so Comanche, Apache, Plains Indians, so I have a justification to wear a Mohawk. I'm going to do it the right way. I'm supposed to have 3 braids. So I have right now a 6. So I'm probably going to have like 6 corn rolls and then coming down to 3 braids. There'll be, and that's exactly, will be a combination of Mohawk and is Algonquin with the 3 braids? But it's supposed to be 3 braids. Or I think, so I'll have it all traditional and have it grown out or whatever. So I mean, I perfectly understand that, but what you're doing is you are those people who are that, those cultural resources and that social identity is removed from them. So when the people and the communities have that and that behavior in them and that history, they're not being viewed as that. So I mean, how? And then you have the prevalence of Hawaiians being homeless over here, and people come over here. Oh, I want to be a real Hawaiian. All right, cool. And the Japanese and other Asians really sadistically like, okay, right there, there's a Hawaiian, there's a Micronesian. They're homeless. I'm better than that to be friends with. I have a little Hawaiian. And then when you find out a month later, oh no, I'm just Filipino. I mean, it's just like, and no one challenges it because people over here to have fun, be cool, you know what I'm saying? See the beach, whatever. Not here to confront and get into arguments, whatever. And they're just like, okay, well, that's nice. And in their head, they're probably thinking it, but, and to them, it reinforces that belief that you could just constantly appropriate. Anyways. But that being said, it could be used to the advantage in Russia because there's a lot of Ukrainian blood. And that could be weaponized. And it needs to be weaponized. What happened when the 1991 collapse of the Soviet Union, where Bloodless Clue took over Mikhail Gorbachev, hardliners took it over. I mean, he was in Crimea at the time, right? Called for a strike, a national strike, which it basically meant, you know, revolution. You know, it would be read between the lines, you know, that communism, Marxist, Leninist beliefs that, you know, well, there was two diverging thoughts. Constant revolution and consolidating, whatever. So they went more with the, you know, either way, it was both internal, but revolution. But so the strike meant revolution, right? So there's a triggering mechanism that everybody knew what that meant, and it was against hardliners, right? So what they actually did, people want democracy, knew what that meant, took over the hardliners. And they dissolved the Soviet Union, and Russia succeeded from the Union, the Soviet Union, and Russia's the biggest fucking state. So it's like, how did it end? You think all the other satellite countries did it? No, the biggest one succeeded, and then all the others followed suit. It was like, hell, everything around Moscow succeeded from the USSR. And like, you know, Ukraine was like, fuck this, we're out. You know, Estonia, Lithuania, Lithuania also did that, you know. I don't know why Kongsberg did it. It's a little thorn in our backs, you know, our toe. But anyways, what I'm saying is that there's different regions of Russia that probably want to succeed from the Soviet Union, and some of them could survive as independent states. I don't know if that's a good idea, but I'm just throwing out there. I don't think it's a good idea. But what I'm saying is, regionally, there are probably good portions of it that having those historical ties to Ukraine might be useful. And all I'm saying is it might be useful because the prevalence of Ukrainian blood all over Russia. All right, let me take another bathroom break. I'll continue playing the other half of this.
Immediately dispatched scouts to find a way across. When a ford was located downriver, a large cavalry detachment under Stertinius was sent to ride out and establish a surprise flank against the Germans. Meanwhile, his primus Pulis, a man named Emilius, was sent with another detachment of cavalry to find a ford upriver, forming a classic pincer maneuver. Germanicus anticipated that the enemy would move to counter these forces. Thus, when he observed the enemy center begin to reform, he now ordered a charge straight through the center where the river current was at its fiercest. Taking up the charge would be the elite Batavian cavalry, famed for their bravery and strength. The gamble here appears to have been to use the assault to fix the enemy in place and buy time for the flanking forces, and, if luck would have it, perhaps even rout the tribes entirely. However, Arminius was ever the clever commander. He sent troops to intercept the cavalry on the sides while ordering his own forces in the center to undertake a feigned flight. This succeeded in drawing the Batavians into a clearing surrounded by woods, at which point an ambush was sprung that sealed them in. The elite auxiliaries were now forced to fight on all sides. They only managed to hang on due to their high levels of discipline and excellent gear. Slowly, though, they were being picked off, either in close quarters or by the flurry of missiles that rained down among their packed ranks. When all seemed lost, the Batavian commander Cariovalda and his retinue made the ultimate sacrifice. They suicidally plunged straight into the jaws of the Germanic line whilst ordering their brethren to punch through the back. Thankfully, their daring escape was facilitated by the arrival of Roman cavalry from the wings who had come to the rescue. This ragtag group of survivors now pulled back to the Weser. First blood had gone to Arminius. However, the action was not a complete disaster. In the chaos, Germanicus had actually managed to make an uncontested crossing with the legions. Most of these immediately set to work constructing a camp to secure this strategic victory. Meanwhile, others dispersed to form a protective screen, while several units prepared to join the fray. Yet by this point, Germanicus could see that things were quickly falling apart, and there was no need feeding yet more men into the bloody fields ahead. After all, who knew what other traps had been set by his wily opponent? Therefore, the Roman commander called a retreat, settled down for the night, and made ready to tend to the survivors as they trickled in. Once more, Germanicus and his officers huddled in a tent to plan their next moves. As they did so, they made sure to read all the latest reports coming in from the units of the exploratores and the speculatores who acted as the eyes and ears of the army. Luckily, fortune would smile upon them. Apparently, a deserter from the German camp had turned traitor, bringing with him the secrets of the enemy. These supposedly revealed that Arminius had selected a battlefield and was preparing a preliminary attack as soon as this night. Such important, yet potentially false information had to be confirmed. It seems that Roman spies were able to verify the claims by creeping close to the enemy lines, whereupon they heard the neighing of horses and the movement of a tumultuous host. A fight was imminent. Germanicus went into high alert and wanted to be sure that his own forces were ready to meet any challenge that might be thrown against them. Disguising himself, he secretly slipped from the augury tent and wandered between the campfires, eavesdropping on conversations and even joining in on others, trying to get the measure of his men. What he heard was encouraging. Tacitus tells us that, quote, Germanicus enjoyed the men talk positively about himself, while they acknowledged that they ought to repay him with their gratitude in battle, and at the same time sacrifice the perfidious violators of peace to a glorious vengeance. This was a good sign. He was doubly reassured by the jeering responses of the sentries when a rider came from the Germanic camp, shouting to all who might hear that Arminius was willing to pay any Romans handsomely should they turn traitor. The soldiers responded, "Let daylight come, let battle be given, then we'll take your land and carry off your women." As the sun rose the next day, the Romans were ready and waiting before their camp in battle order. This seems to have thwarted an initial skirmishing attack on the camp, which pulled back without any exchange of missiles. Both sides now prepared for a pitched battle, making rousing speeches to their men. Germanicus spoke of the superiority of Roman discipline, their gear, and their bravery that would see them win out. The legions must only weather the initial storm, and victory would be theirs. Meanwhile, Arminius roused his own men, assuring them that the Romans they faced were cowardly fugitives and mutineers. Half their backs were covered from the wounds of retreat, while the limbs of the rest were battered by storms. Far from their fleet and their forts, the Romans held no hope of advantage. He finished by shouting, quote, "Remember only their greed, their cruelty, their pride. Is anything left for us but to retain our freedom, or to die before we are enslaved?" With that, the two armies advanced on the plain of Iristaviso. As the Roman forces deployed with drilled discipline, the Germanic tribesmen flowed down from the slopes to meet them. Arminius had some 50,000 or more warriors that massed in their tribes and clans along a wide front that stretched across the width of the plain up to the forest. Here, along the slopes, were posted the Cherushi, who aimed to rush down upon the enemy once battle was joined. Before them were ranged a thin screen of skirmishers. As for the cavalry, their strength and position are unattested to. Perhaps they are left out from our records because of their low numbers, with protection of the flanks being yielded to the infantry and the terrain. Opposite them was an enormous Roman army of some 74,000 men deployed into three lines. The first was made up of several thousand Gallic and Germanic auxiliaries backed by archers. Behind these stood 4 legions, with the 2 Praetorian cohorts sent by Tiberius at their center. In the final line stood 4 more legions, light troops, and the remaining allied units. Some 8,000 cavalry were arranged On the Roman left by the forested flank, with an additional 2,000 mounted archers. By this point, it must have been around midday. The sun shone brightly overhead as over 100,000 men dripped with sweat in anticipation of what was to come. Finally, the initiative was seized by the Germanic tribes, who now unleashed an attack on the front lines. We are told that these crashed upon the Romans with a mighty fury, Arminius and the Cherushi nearly piercing through the ranks of the auxiliary and the archers. However, this was clearly anticipated by Germanicus, who had used his most disposable troops as a breaker. Now, with the first wave having crashed, he sent forth the cavalry to assault the flank and the rear. The elite riders under Stertinius smashed into the melee by the forest's edge. Missiles flew in all directions, and even Arminius was injured, though fighting on nonetheless. At this point, an auspicious omen was observed. 8 eagles, one for each legion, flew over the battlefield. Seeing this, Germanicus shouted to his men, quote, "Go, follow the birds of Rome, follow the true gods of our legions." And with that, the colossus of the Roman army advanced in mass. Their crushing weight added to the front, in combination with the flanking maneuvers of the cavalry, proved inexorable. All discipline broke down within the German army. Those at the front tried to flee from the grim Roman tide, while those who had been held in reserve charged into the fray. This swirling of desperate men only added further to the chaotic disintegration of the tribal battle lines. The Germanic commander, Iguiomerus, managed to escape, while Arminius also fled on horse, having smeared blood on his face to hide his identity. I'll now quote Tacitus. "The rest were cut down in every direction. Many, in attempting to swim across the Visurgis, were overwhelmed under a storm of missiles or by the force of the current."
Okay, let me make sure that my mic is on. My God. Oh, okay, so I forget what I totally got over, but the main point of it is that I think he's going to pick up conscripts and play all of his hands at once into Russia. And he's going to use that as basically a meat grinder to get his undesirables that he has in Russia to fight for that Slavic cause. So you're going to kill 2 birds with one stone, gain territory in Ukraine and kill off people at the front lines he doesn't want to, while using mercenaries and Belarusians, whatever. And it's not going to be as effective fighting force as Ukrainians. But even as the purges happen in Stalin Russia, and it's eventually going to figure out how to be an effective fighting force to fully mobilize. Because he's getting a really talent and putting loyalists in, and people with the same racist views and end goals that he does have. And because what's the good of somebody with all this talent and skill if it's not used for his racist Slavic end goal, his Nazi Russian mindset. So they have to have this Russian Nazi mindset to be put into power. If they don't have it, he gets rid of them because they're no good, because it's not used for that. So you'll have there's all this talent in the world, but it doesn't have the same, if you don't want the same goals, then what good is it? You know what I'm talking about? So what? So you're talented, but that talent is not being used for what I need it for. So it could be all the talent in the world. You might as well be in NATO, you know what I'm saying? So you're just going to purge them. So a little bit of talent and loyalty is better than no talent in that position. But they're going to gradually learn how to fight over time. So it needs to end quicker than later, because if it gets drawn out, the more Russia will have the advantage and be able to mobilize that manpower, because they're going to be forced to fight one way or the other, because he does want to get rid of that population, recolonize other parts of Russia and recolonize Ukraine, depopulate and withdraw the population that could be loyal, the kids and everything, and repopulate it with Russians. And I think before that, you want that to happen. You want Ukrainians to have more of a combat effectiveness. And so what I stated in the title is that you know where there is constant pressure. You want to constantly create pressure where there's more combat taking place. So you have these training attacks, and it's a trial by fire. You don't put like people that don't know anything, but people that then that already been trained, and now they're actually going to see in combat. You have a probing training attack. You could use that to gain ground or whatever, up the river and however you want to do it. And then you rotate those people into the rear where they need to defend. And then you have the next group that needs to train in combat, trial by fire. And in this lull of fighting, what people are calling a stalemate, but it's just a lull because stalemates happen over a period of time or whatever. And they're just regrouping, and you don't really want them to regroup, so you want to constantly create pressure. So you want to kill two birds with stone and multitask at the same time, get this combat effectiveness spread out through all of Ukraine, So you're just trying to do everything you possibly can over here, because they're going to gradually learn how to fight, and you don't know exactly where the Russians are going to come down. And like I said before, you were able to artillery strike the same airfield like 3 times or whatever, because they always placed it there, because that's the kind of ineptitude that you are facing. But it's not always going to be like that. But that being said, they're probably going to come down the same avenue of attack, more or less, and you want to guide them into these traps and everything. But you definitely want to be more prepared than they are if they don't take the same avenues approaches. That's what I said before, more or less. Now, getting into Putin and his demagoguery or whatever, that's how he gained power. Everybody thinks he gained power through this being this genius and being part of the KGB. That's all part of it in those tactics. And it's also that he find a legal way, being a lawyer, to get into that. But the majority of how he gained power is this naturalistic view, this racist view to get in there. So this ultra loyal racist view to the Slavic cause. And then him being KGB created this auspices about he's able to do it. And now he's in a fight, and they all know what the end goal is, to further Russia. And he crossed that threshold. He crossed that point of no return. He's going to try to pull in loyally and people where he can and put them in place and try to work, that puzzle as fast as he can. He got that Rubik's Cube going up in his head, and 40 chess trying to do all that at the same time. So that's what he's trying to do. He's trying to put his racist Russians in place. So that's his mentality. And he's going to go to the end. And he's going to try to mobilize his country and make it the Thatcher regime as much as possible, and use whoever further the Slavic cause. So they all know what the end goal is, and they're all going to follow it. I'm talking about, because it worked before, and they're just going to try to figure it out on the go. So it looks like they're lost. And to them, it's like, oh yeah, we took a hit, but we could outthink this. We got this, Okay, we got these people we don't like, throw them into the combat. Get these other people from these other countries, have them fight for the Slavic cause. These Belarusians, we'll kill 2 birds with 1 stone. We'll remove all the military, have them grind it up into nothing, and then we just overtake it over to them, because they're going to utilize over 100 million people they have already in Russia. Because over time, they do have an advantage. But honestly, it's like they're coming down this path, and they're just going to be grinded up. And this is when people don't know any better. Back in the times where, you had like scrolls and shit like that. And, this is the information age, we're resupplying them, and they have the will of fight. So they're coming into a meat grind. So all those old tactics and you're reading, he can't outthink it, but he's so arrogant that he thinks he could outthink it and put in his, his Russian Nazis into place. So he's not, as he crosses threshold, and he's going to do everything he can to have it happen. We already said he's going to use these, this horrific weapons to, get it done, but that's still not going to be enough. But when you're in this ideology of thinking you're racially superior, you think you could outsmart them. And you're going to continually to do this because you're better than they are, you know? To us, it's like you're going to lose or whatever. But to him, it's just like, no, we got this. We can adjust. And what's coming down, he's probably going to throw everything he has. And so that's why you need to prepare for it. Have these training attacks and rotate that combat experience into where it needs to be. And blunt that attack all at the same time, because it's going to be probably his major hand, if not his final hand or whatever, you know, because in him, he's gaining territory. He just has to fully resupply it and figure out things because, like I said, he's superior. He's they're the dominant race, you know. I'm talking about we could win, you know. I'm talking about there's no way these people could outdo us. And that's why he's going to keep on going. And he has to be delivered a military defeat. It's not something, you know, that could just... you could take his word out, you know. I mean, granted, like, things end on treaties and everything else like that, but it's sort of like you have to have an unconditional surrender where it has to be democracy, because he's going to force it into a fascist regime. And he's always at the point of no return. And when you're at the point of no return, you're going to further, you know, to the end. It's like, fuck it. They already think this. Might as well do that. You know what I'm talking about? You know what I'm saying? But in that confusion of them not knowing what to do, you got to use it to your best ability. If they don't know how to fight now, this is when they even press and be more aggressive on the field or whatever, and get as many people built up, become as effective as it's not, because it's not, you can't guarantee them they're not going to always know how to fight. And I don't want to underestimate Russia. And prepared to what's come, you know, is just what hand is going to be played. But and separate that battlefield, you know, like trying to have those fortified cities in between the major fights. And I think we're getting like switchblades and stuff like that. I don't know, 100. I guess they said it has a strength of 3 grenades. I don't know what that could do, but are they white phosphorus grenades? And they're already using phosphorus grenades, and I know they're already being used on the battlefield. We should use white phosphorus grenades because they could go through a tank. They could go through a ship. They could burn underwater, you know? And so it makes more sense to use these switchblades as white phosphorus ship killers, to tell you the truth. Granted, you know, you hit right at the waterline, you get 3 of them, maybe 4, you know, because this makes a hole, you know? I need a couple holes all at the same time. And then the ship tilts or whatever, you know, if you hit it at different angles or whatever, then it just sort of sinks like that. But if you get all on the same side, then you can capsize it, right? And then, you know, but you'd have mines and things, all different ways to, you know, you want to kill ships, and you could get anti-aircraft guns pointed at one of these ships, and they got like a huge ash rifle just ding, 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 just dinging away at the side of the hole, whatever, right? And I think they use artillery now, which is kind of difficult. You can level the artillery, but old school anti-aircraft guns on ships be able to take it down also. He's got these little raptors zooming around, these little fast raptors. And honestly, like, what's going to take out a raptor is who shoots first, right? So if you have like an anti-aircraft even heavier than 50 caliber, I mean, 50 caliber ain't going to do it. Maybe armor-piercing grenade launcher is going to take down a raptor. You know, I don't know, maybe. But something higher caliber than that, you know. Like, you don't need a full-on cannon or whatever, but, you know, I'm saying it's just, so you got to see we put on a smaller craft, and you take down the raptors, then you get a straight line shot at the bigger ships, you know. So you want to focus on the Raptors first. And you just have any ship that could just put on like an anti-aircraft gun or whatever kind of grenade launcher or whatever. It's be kind of difficult with getting it kind of close, whatever. But you want to have like a longer shot. You want to have first shot capability on a ship, on a Raptor, to take them down. And boom, take down the Raptors. Then the bigger ships are open. You know what I'm talking about? So that's how you want to do, clear the field on that. They're already making those like technicals, whatever, putting machine guns on trucks and everything else like that. And you see some of these Humvees come back, they're like all shot up and shit like that. That's how they're fighting with small arms. And I'm thinking like on these Humvees and other things, you want a grenade launcher because you're going after other personnel. And so if you're shooting at a machine gun, and you got grenade launchers, enough, it's a lot of ammo, whatever, but you're gonna more or less get more of a kill than with those, you know. So you got these medium machine guns on there, they're not doing much of anything. So you got to switch out. If you already have a vehicle, you want to put the biggest crew served weapon you have, you know, the biggest caliber weapon you have on it, you know, so because you want to hold that around or whatever, you know. So that's my thought. That they're putting like these lower caliber machine guns on there. Go big, you know, saying, you know, it's like don't go at all. So I think these Mark 19s would probably be a big boost if you en masse able to mount those on vehicles. So that's my thought. What else? I don't just had the small things I had like that with the grenade launchers, switchblades being white phosphorus, taking out the Raptors, whatever. You know, I'm just saying like I would love to have sea torpedoes and stuff like that, or anti-ship missile capabilities, but I don't think it's going to take a year to get up in Air Force. I think it's going to take weeks if you really are motivated to build MiGs yourself, and that's my thinking. Just once you commit yourself to that project, like we had a Manhattan project to be like a Manhattan project of Ukraine to build MiGs, you know, that kind of thing. That's how important it is. And you know, gradually get faster and faster and faster and faster, you know, that's my thinking. But that's the only thing I want to push back on, you know, because it's not a typical thing. You know, people are forced to do or motivated to do this, you know, so it's not like the same environment that we have out here. It's okay, we got to get this together and that we follow a very corporate structure. This is all right. You knew we need to get metal, we need to get welders, we need to get, you know, whatever, you know, engines, whatever it is, you know, I'm talking about. And they're like, all right, we got this, you know. So it's a whole different thing. And I think what it really comes down to is putting the people in place that could pull all these resources together and this technical ability to make a MiG or a boat, you know, or whatever it is. I'm gonna say a boat, but fight tanks and shit. But honestly, I don't know what's more effective out there, you know. I mean, oh yeah, then artillery is just like, if you had an artillery piece from even World War One, they had massive artillery pieces, absolutely huge, like the Paris gun or whatever and stuff like that. I mean, but that being said, that HE and that, even if you have old ass artillery, it should all be flooded into Ukraine. It's still gonna do what it's need to do. It's still gonna cause you can still take out tanks and artillery. I mean, yeah, you can take out artillery, whatever it is with them. Doesn't matter how old it is. Put it in there. It doesn't matter. You know what I'm talking about? So we don't want to put our newer pieces in, but you know, there's. I'm not saying they're sitting around doing nothing, but you're going to tell me that even a Civil War mortar, unless it was fired, but some of those old World War One, Civil War, thinking like Fredericksburg and Vicksburg and shit like that. We had some we had some massive fucking cannons on the Potomac. You just take a photo of that, it's like two people get stand inside the barrel and shit like that. It's fucking crazy. We'll take out a tank. Might have to... But you probably, I have to say, the thing it shot out is massive. So my point is like a big bertha for World War I would be effective. And all my point is that older artillery, let's put it in there. 70s, 60s, 50s. You'd be all right. 40s, you know, it's better than nothing. You know, I'm talking about, especially you have a target opportunity, you could have an artillery piece that does damage, you know, that kind of thing. They're already putting in like Soviet era stuff, so why not? Like I said, I already reached a point of where I'm seeing it is what I'm getting, you know, where I'm like, okay, yeah, that's good, you know, really highly informed people on there, except for the stalemate, like I was stating before. They're just regrouping, and you definitely want to disrupt that regrouping as possible. But you're going against someone that's pointing the point of no return and thinks he could win. And you got to make sure that it's a loss that's undeniable loss, that there's no way to argue out of it. And it's a physical, violent thing. And my experience is that whenever there's any kind of engagement, physical engagement, people always go back and say they won no matter what and try to argue it. Unless the person's vomiting, coughing up blood, passed out, and everybody sees that, then you really can't argue way out. They'll try. But like, dude, you threw up all over yourself. You're passed out, and it's not like you threw a few punches and we said, oh, who won, who didn't. Which is good, because I was so lucky that, I fought a lot of Italians, and I didn't realize till later where the help was coming from. And maybe years after or whatever, maybe a little bit at the time, but I didn't understand why, even though I fought Irish, they were on my side more so than I fought them. It was like against the Italians, so it's like they would always do the gasland facade for me, and other Latinos that are light-skinned Latinos even more so. But my point is that the only way to never lose a violent confrontation is not to put yourself into one. That's what I learned after a while. It's just like, it's all bullshit. People make so much money out there doing the right thing. It's just doing anything criminal. It's just dumb, And you don't have to lie and bullshit and whatever. But then people pick up on that. They see how much what you gain by just being total bullshit or whatever, and so it has this strength unto itself, which is really sad because it's built on a house of cards, but people get harmed by it. People die from it. Genocide happens from it. And you sort of see that on a smaller scale. that you do something, you win all these fights or whatever, and then the ones you lose or whatever, you gaslight about. It further accentuates who you are. But people don't want to do that work and get in all those fights and just to be total gaslight or whatever, you know? But that's where it came into play. That you had to already be there, and then you put that, you know, brag on top of that and all that other bullshit. But it's more like a survival instinct or whatever, because you know people see through all of it, but they know a lot of it's real, you know. I'm talking about, so you know it's real, it's not, or whatever. But somehow we got in that mentality on January 6th where it's just total bullshit. And where a mob, an untalented, unsophisticated mob, could bring down a very intricate, developed civilization, you know? And it's dangerous. So he's building up this racist facade. And the only way to bring it down is having it undeniable that it's not the right way to govern people. And it has to be undeniable, even to his own people. And when it's undeniable, where he doesn't have the ability to lie to people, that's when the shit will end. So he has to be delivered not only a loss, it can't be a negotiated loss, because he'll use that as a victory. He'll weaponize that. So, I mean, it's not important that we win. And the Ukrainians will win, but they give everything to actually destroy Russia and whatever they bring to bear. And so, I don't know. What I'm concerned about is when he uses chemical weapons, he's going to find out they're not as effective that he thinks they are. And what comes after that? That's my main concern. But even if these tactical nuclear weapons are used, it's still not enough. You think it is, but it isn't. And then we're going to be at the point of no return. You know what I mean? So, I mean, he's already set on this mentality already, past that threshold. And, like, I don't want to state anything of escalation or whatever. But I definitely, people saying it's a fight for civilization, I think this is definitely a turning point in history. And our end goal needs to be democracies. It has to be. United States and China. And then we work on all the rest, because we can't keep doing this. And instead of like being altruistic and turning the other cheek, we have tough love. You know, that we make a democracy, you're better off with democracy and your quality of life with the democracy. Because we want to be civilized. We want to be moral, but that's being used against us. And that's the only reason why I say, I know it's a metaphor, turn the other cheek, but we want to do what's right. We have to make the environment where we're capable of doing what's right, and we get that back. We want to have the environment where we can have a conversation, and it's a real conversation, not only receiving lies and hate and war back. We got in an environment where we're dealing with democracy, where we could put out compassion, empathy, and we're getting that back. We can't just put out compassion and empathy and get a punch in the face back. You know what I'm talking about? We're going to have, and granted, subconsciously and naturally move over to countries that do reciprocate, but now we're enabling these countries. We're enabling China to build up a military. We enabled Russia to do this. So I'm not saying it's our fault, but us being moral and thinking we're superior ourselves, and no matter what we do, we could take care of it. Yeah, we could take care of it. We could take care of this war, but at what cost? So now we got to get in a different mentality. Now we got to give out compassion, empathy, and we could take care of it. We don't want to make problems we don't have to deal with, you know what I'm talking about. And it's nothing. It's like not saying we created a problem. It's like we did it for we being a democracy and empathetic and compassionate and being good people. We were being so good, we created a problem. You know what I'm talking? Because our system of government, our economy is so good, we create a problem. And we just got to adjust it where we don't enable a country that's adversarial to have it like that. But like, no, we could talk them out of it. No, we could handle that. You know, our civil-minded, our intellectual ability could be able to deal with this. And we can't deal with Russian Nazism. There's no talking to it. They're not going to listen to reason. There's no conversation. The only thing it's going to be listened to is violence. And that goes against, furthering civilization. And it's difficult, so it's just like, you need a lot of minds on it, I'm talking about just a lot of good people. So I'll leave it with that. Take what I say and have better minds, or more minds. I won't say better minds that are more focused on that know that area of that not learned information, but that field of knowledge, that study more than I do, and further it. Because over time, they're going to just use their ideology, their demography of Russian Nazism. That's what they had to pull from. And we're wholly imperfect about creating equality in our democracies, but at least we try. And that's our strength, because we're always adjusting, always trying to make ourselves better. And let's pull from the best people and give it to Ukraine. I'll leave it like that. And I think I said most of what I want to say. Hopefully I contributed. But we could definitely handle it. But it's not going to be a pretty thing. And we can't get complacent on it at all. All right. Training attacks. Rotate them to the rear. Do me that favor. Glory to Ukraine. Glory to heroes. Peace.